being authentic, I mean, it's kind of like what I would tell an athlete, you know what I mean? Being authentic and creating and having your own voice, like, and trusting your own voice in that process. Because, I think like, people like often try to replicate, something and everything. And I think, to be most successful is you have to be you.
You're listening to From Athletes to Mentors, a legacy of coaching, a TrainingPeaks series that takes you behind the scenes of endurance sports. I'm your host, Hannah. In this 6-part series, we sit down with top coaches who use TrainingPeaks to discuss their journeys. We'll trace their path from athlete to mentor, uncover the biggest lessons they've learned, share their best advice for new coaches, and reveal the strategies behind their most enduring successes. I hope you enjoy this episode, and be sure to check out the other coaches' stories in the playlist.
Well, my name is Ryan Bolton. I've been affiliated. I always like to say I've been affiliated with TrainingPeaks before TrainingPeaks was like digital and online, because Joe Friel was my coach, and I basically had the paper version of TrainingPeaks most of my career. Well, not most of it, but part of it. And so I've been, I guess, affiliated with TrainingPeaks for many, many, many years, or since day one. So, which is 25 years, which makes me feel relatively old, actually, when I think about it that way. But yeah, I mean, it's funny because I still have the same TrainingPeaks account, and it's went dormant during times where I was not training so much, but I still use it basically on a daily basis to track my own, even though my own data is relatively trivial and definitely incredibly inconsistent, because training is not my top priority. But I would say I spend, countless hours per week, and I have over the past many, many years on TrainingPeaks, because I use it, obviously as a platform for both my elite and age group athletes, which that answers the question of, what I do now. I guess I have wear two hats, I guess, in the endurance sports world. You could say I have a coaching business called Bolton Endurance Sports Training. So the acronym is BEST. And we're
Did you do that on purpose?
Yeah, we did, actually. Yeah, I thought, hey, what can we do? What was a cool acronym, and that I could use my name, which was actually Joe Friel's suggestion when we started the group. He was like, put your name in it. You want to associate it with it, because then you'll be more scrutinous. This was great advice of what you put out there if your name's on it, because it has your name on it. And I was like, well, that's really good advice. But anyway, that group, we have a group of coaches who coach athletes like worldwide for endurance sports, tons of cycling, running, and triathlon. I would say those are the main things, but we definitely dip into, we have some coaches who work with ultra runners. We have coaches who work with Nordic skiers, stuff like that. So we use that. And in fact, I even coach a race car driver. The other thing that I do is I'm the director of high performance at USA Triathlon. And so I oversee a lot of the like technology, training, coaching, initiatives for the high performance department at USAT. And I also have a group of athletes, professional athletes, that we have what you would consider a daily training environment, where we're all in one place all the time, kind of traveling around the world, following the races and competing at all those races and everything, which is why I'm currently in France, because this is the summer season is very, very European centric. So it's nice to be here because we can race. There are races every weekend within a very, very short flight or a train ride from here.
Yeah, easier than flying back and forth from
exactly. Here. Yeah, it saves the jet lag in a massive way. So yeah.
Yeah.
Plus, Europe's a pretty nice place to be in the summer, so I don't mind it at all.
Yeah, absolutely. When you were training under Joe Friel, did you know you wanted to be a coach, or how did that come about?
Not 100%. And it's a really good question, because when you look back on like your career and you're like, how did I get to where I am now? Like my undergraduate degree, and this is, before I met Joe, and before Joe coached me, was in exercise physiology. When I was getting that degree, I wasn't thinking, I'm going to be an endurance sports coach, in the future, which in fact, I mean, technically there, I guess you could have coached at a university for, a running program or something, but even triathlon, triathlon coaching was like relatively fledgling at that point. And stuff like TrainingPeaks didn't exist at that point. Then when I was racing and training under Joe, I think, I started thinking about it a little bit, and Joe would actually talk with me about it a bit. And then when I retired from racing, I went back to graduate school. And when I went back to graduate school, my degree was in basically metabolism and nutrition, which was very exercise science centric as well. And Joe, in a very Joe Friel way, kind of like quietly and like, not directly, I would say, like kind of pushed me into coaching a bit, and and it just kind of snowballed from there. So, and yeah, it was funny because I can't think of like a distinct time where Joe and I like sat down and he was like, I think you should be a coach and this is what you should do and this is how you can do it. It was more of like, like subtle nudges here and there and connections with people and everything. And then, like I said, it kind of gets you to where you're sitting now. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, it seems like it worked out. So,
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, it's been great. And I mean, and I'm still really close with Joe. We still connect often, and yeah, I appreciate everything that he's done for me. And I can tell you the first time that I met him, like I said, and I was reading basically the Triathletes Training Bible, um, and then meeting with him in Fort Collins when he used to live in Fort Collins. Like I had no idea that basically 25 years later, I'd still be close with him and still closely associated with Training Peaks.
yeah. Well, since you've been with us since the inception, you've seen, how Training Peaks has changed. Um, how has that affected your coaching business? And what are some of the things like in Training Peaks you couldn't live without now that maybe you did without back then?
I mean, the general functionality is just huge, but the
Yeah.
ATP, that's like, it's such a critical piece of what we do. It is my outline for every single athlete. And I think for me, especially, with, you have a lot of athletes doing, pretty different schedules, and I mean, from Ironman to, to elite running races to, the world triathlon circuit, like that each person's annual training plan looks so differently that it's easy for me to use that as a tool to look back, to like, I can pop in there at any time and be like, this is where we are. This is what we're focusing on. This is why we're focusing on this right now. This is when your next races are, et cetera. So it's just so valuable because I do have athletes like kind of racing at different levels and all around the world at, at different times, that it's nice to be able to both use that to plan, but also to like as a good check-in and reminder of this is where we are. And honestly, I like using it for that reason with athletes too. You know what I mean? Because they start to learn, okay, if we're in this phase, it means this type of training because we're focusing on this, because we're this many weeks out, from a specific race or everything. So I would say, I mean, that is one, and it's one that's existed since day one. And it has evolved, I feel like, for sure. But it's definitely, it's a super valuable tool. I feel like the things that Training Peaks did well right away was it was made relatively user friendly and everything. And I know, and the analytics was like, you didn't see that anywhere else. And now I feel like that's how Training Peaks stays ahead, is like the analytics continue to improve and they're kind of like staying on top of it. But I also think, adding other like, applications like the Training Peaks virtual and stuff like that has been like a nice way to grow too. I often actually think about like I've been there for every graduation and every rendition. And I think about if I were like a brand new coach and I were logging on to Training Peaks now, like how long would it take me to learn what I know about the usability of Training Peaks? And it would take a while, you know what I mean? Because of what there is. And it's funny because sometimes when we have new coaches come with the coaching group is, we need to do somewhat of a significant tutorial to show them like basically all the functioning and how to use everything adequately. And I'm actually surprised sometimes when I meet coaches who use Training Peaks who don't know about like, some, function that is like really usable, and they're like, oh my gosh, you just changed, the way I see things. Like I said, it's pretty robust anymore. So it covers a lot of things, and the usability has really evolved over the years as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And would you say your athletes like utilize Training Peaks as well, or are you doing a lot of the data breakdown,
No, they do.
sending
They
them.
do, definitely. Some athletes don't want to look at the data, you know what I mean? And some of them want to look at absolutely everything. So I think, it kind of depends. But I guess my job as a coach is that's why I want to know how all of it works. And I make sure I stay on top of all it works because I have athletes who definitely, like know the functionality as much as I do, or the analytics as much as I do, even, because it's just their personalities and everything. So yeah, it's really dependent upon each athlete ultimately, though.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And I would say an interesting way that I approach it is it's almost like per athlete, depending upon how much analysis they want, because some people get overwhelmed, by that, whereas other ones want to know absolutely everything. I mean, I would say one of my favorite functions for analysis that has been kind of a standard is, and I mean, even the verbiage that's used, TSS scores, and CTL and acute training load and your fatigue levels and stuff is like the performance management chart is awesome. And I love using it and I love looking at it for every athlete. Even if I'm not sharing that information with them, it's great for me to track that because it's great to track, progress with that. Some of the other stuff like specifics, it's very dependent upon the athlete on like whether they want to know, that information or not, or even the level of detail. I think one thing that has really been beneficial is as we get more devices like that you can incorporate in, wearables that actually give information that's where I've found probably the most, so they're like outside devices that upload to Training Peaks, and being able to like map and look at that data like within Training Peaks is like hugely valuable, because otherwise I'd be visiting 4 different apps every day to get data on specific athletes, and especially the elites, because we are using like a lot more analytical tools with them and everything. So yeah, it's nice that it's all consolidated onto the one app that we use the most.
Since you're working with athletes across the board, from it sounds like people who are newer to like elites and pros,
Yeah.
is there anything like any trends in the endurance space that you're seeing right now that maybe are a little different or that are
One trend, and this doesn't have to do with training, is I feel like people are diversifying a bit more. And what I mean by that is, 10 years ago, like if I had an age group triathlete, like the season would consist of, like let's say they're trying to make the 70.3 world championships, their season would consist of, a handful of 70.3 races and, to qualify and lead up and prep for that properly and everything. And I would say now that same athlete, they're doing 2 70.3s along with the world championships, but they're also doing a gravel event and a half marathon and a trail run. And I see that a lot more with the age group level athletes, is they're like diversifying. Like I said, they're not just sticking with like their one category, whether that's running or, or triathlon or cycling. They're kind of like dipping their toes into other things. And for me, it's actually nice, especially for that level of athlete, because it kind of diversifies it and it makes their seasons more like interesting and exciting for them. And it doesn't get, their season then doesn't get as like stagnant. You know what I mean? They're just like, they're mixing up a little bit. And I would say part of that is just that there are more opportunities for those types of things. You know what I mean? There's just so much more of those alternative, I guess, type of events to dip your toes into. And so, people are taking advantage of that. And I have seen that has been a change over this past, I would say, 5-ish years.
Yeah. And does that change how you're building their schedules and workouts, or do you build them around like their biggest race, the 70.3?
I normally build around their biggest races, and oftentimes it depends on how focused they are on that event. And I'll use an example. I have an athlete this year who's doing the Leadville 100 mountain bike race and also the Hawaii Ironman. And so, yeah. And so she, interestingly, she like right now, the focus is more on like, say, bike volume, and mountain biking and being on the mountain bike more often and everything, but we're still doing triathlon training. But the focus is definitely more of an emphasis, but honestly, and looking at it once again for an age group athlete, the type of training that she's having to do to prep for Leadville is actually brilliant, ultimately,
Mm-hmm.
prep for the Ironman, because she'll shift gears right after that, and increase the swimming and running volume. But all the bike work that she's doing right now is only going to be beneficial for her Kona, both her Kona build and her performance there. So yeah.
Yeah. And you mentioned Leadville, and that reminded me that you mentioned altitude training earlier. Do you do altitude training with all of your athletes, or is this like a specific subset that it's more beneficial
Yeah,
for?
just with the elite athletes that I work with,
Okay.
if they have access to it and they can, we do. Like the actual uh, daily training environment that I work with, we do. And in fact, and this is kind of fun and interesting, as we've discussed, I'm in France right now, and in France,
Mm-hmm.
I'm currently at 900 feet, so basically sea level. However, the facilities that we use here have it's their altitude dorms. So the athletes are currently sleeping. Depends on the athlete and how their body's adapting and stuff. Is they're currently sleeping somewhere between um, like 2,100 meters and 2,700 meters. So that's like 7,000 to like high 8,000, almost
Mm-hmm.
9,000 feet. Um, so it's that's kind of a fun technology that we can use. However, like I said, we go from here actually to real altitude, which is different. Training slightly different, when it's that way. I love being in the situation that we're in right now because they're getting as much of the impact of sleeping at altitude and spending time
Mm-hmm.
in their rooms at altitude. We encourage them to spend, relatively as much time as possible in their rooms to get as much stimulus as possible. But then all of our training sessions are at sea level and sea level effort. So it's a really really nice balance. When we're just doing altitude training, we have to there's a more adjustment with the training based on
Mm-hmm.
because of the impact of actually training at altitudes.
Yeah. Would it be a lower training load
Yeah,
than
it's a
at
lower training
altitude?
load. Yeah, intervals are like I always call. I went to college in Laramie, Wyoming, which is 7,200 feet, and our coach would always he said we would run 1,500-meter repeats, and he would call them altitude miles, and which is kind of true, and so I would say we incorporate that type of stuff into the training, like without going into specifics so much, but to simulate sea level efforts will modify even interval like recovery periods and durations, um, um, to accommodate for the altitude so that we can get a proper stimulus. Because it's hard. I would say that's the thing, especially
Yeah.
when you're doing, shorter, faster type events.
Mm-hmm.
That punch, that power, that speed is really important to develop, and it's harder to do at altitude, I feel like.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah.
And I guess if someone's training for Leadville, they need to at least be able to, breathe at that altitude for a
Right. Yeah.
long
Well,
period
that's
of
true
time.
too. So yeah. So those people, so that's like, if you talk about an age group athlete who they live in Toledo, Ohio, we'll say, you know what
Okay.
I mean? And if they're training for, Leadville, then that's definitely going to be a challenge. I mean, if they had all the resources in the world and all the time in the world, I would highly encourage them to be trained at altitude to be ready for that, especially an event like Leadville. It's 100 miles. It's not like, you need to be, sprinting well for that or anything, unless I guess you're one of the top guys, because they maybe are. No, I mean, yeah, even an age group athlete, if they had the ability at that point for training for a race like that, I would definitely encourage them to be at altitude, because boy, that's a rude introduction if you're not. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it definitely is. So obviously you're traveling with your athletes right now. So you have, it seems like, close athlete coach relationship with them. How do you think that plays into their success? And how do you think the coach athlete relationship um, affects, how long they're in the sport, if it does?
To me, it's at that level, at the elite level, at the professional level, it's it's everything. Like it's there's so much value in being with the athletes on a daily basis. And this is a good it is it's awesome, because when you like talking about what we just talked about, like all the analytical tools on Training Peaks, like that's all so valuable. But the most valuable thing is when I show up at the workout tomorrow and I look into the athlete's eyes, and it's an athlete's eyes that I look into on a daily basis over years. Like I understand exactly how they're feeling and what's going on with them, without having to read any data at that point. And I think that is really valuable, because that human component, and every athlete is so different. You know what I mean? Their data could all say the same thing, and and have similar numbers and stuff like that. But like that connection, and that connection point is like, I mean, it's ultimately what coaching is. And so I mean, I do find a ton of value in that, and I do even. It's kind of my favorite times of coaching is actually I think a lot of coaches would say this, like, I spend a lot of time working on schedules and everything and all of that, but your favorite time is like, when you're actually physically with athletes, like standing on a track or standing on a pool deck or out on a bike or following them in a car on the bike. I mean, those are really valuable times. One of the biggest like arts of coaching is understanding each athlete and like what they need, what you need to give them for them to accomplish their goals or refocus on goals or whatever, because they're all, I mean, they're so individuals. It's impossible to just throw one method, I guess you could say, or one method of communication even at them and make it work.
Yeah, and taking everything that you've learned, is there a piece of advice you'd give to a coach just starting out that you wish you knew? Obviously, no trade secrets necessary, but
Yeah. No, I mean, being authentic, I mean, it's kind of like what I would tell an athlete, you know what I mean? Being authentic and creating and having your own voice, like, and trusting your own voice in that process. Because, I think like, people like often try to replicate, something and everything. And I think, to be most successful is you have to be you, and you have to find your own path. I mean, even coaches that work in our coaching group, like I'm always like, hey, these are the fundamentals, and these are the fundamentals that I absolutely believe in. And if you're working with our group, I feel like you need to be following, but I'm like, but find your own voice in that. And your style with your athletes is who you are, and like to embrace that, and kind of build on your strengths there. And then also, recognize what your limiters may be and then work on those. So, I mean, it's kind of like exactly how I would approach an athlete is, as a coach, I'm a huge believer in creating a big foundation to build upon.
mm-hmm.
And I think it's a quote that like I love to use is, your peak is as high as your base is long. And obviously that evolves through athletes' careers, as they get older and everything, and like how much foundation needs to be built. But I really, really am a big believer in creating that like core, and then building upon that. And so it's, athletes, it's interesting getting them at different stages in their careers. Cause sometimes like I'll start working with an athlete who's been, racing at a top level for quite a while. And you almost have to like rewind and look, what have they done and what is that? Whereas like with new athletes and everything, you almost like have to start at that core and then build up, which is a challenge when you have a group, because people are doing different workouts sometimes, because
Mm-hmm.
of where they are kind of in their process. But I would say that's it. And the second piece of that is I am a giant believer in periodization and like,
Mm-hmm.
going through kind of the, hills and troughs of the season, and making sure that athletes are, getting adequate recovery at specific times of the year. And then also, so that they can really peak well. I would say it's easy to coach someone to be good all the time. It's very hard to coach someone to be great once or twice a year. There's an art to that, So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Kind of touched on this, but what are some of the most rewarding aspects of being a coach?
Seeing growth in athletes, both from a performance perspective, because ultimately that's kind of what coaching is about. You're trying to accomplish goals, but also just seeing them grow like as people. And I'm not even talking about just young kids, you know what I mean? Or,
Mm-hmm.
a 22-year-old or a 24-year-old, or, watching them grow. But even like adults, watching them like evolve as people because of the confidence that they're gaining, or, how they're just kind of evolving in their understanding of themselves and what makes them tick and what they can actually accomplish and stuff. I mean, that's a lot of fun. So, I mean, it is really rewarding. I always say, I know I was meant to coach, or at least from a career standpoint, because I get more out of my athletes performing well than I ever did out of my performances. Like I was always proud of what I did, and when I had good races, I was really happy with it. But it's not nearly as significant as how proud I get of athletes when they do well, that I'm working with. And I feel like because it's more of a project, with them and everything, it's in all of that. There's more involved than, just my, pure performance and everything. So like, it's really rewarding coaching and with that.
Yeah. And are you still racing at all or just
No, not at all.
focusing? No. Okay.
No. I try, like I said, if you looked at my training peaks, I would be very embarrassed. I'm definitely not telling you what my current CTL is, because it's pretty bad. And, but I try to get out as much as I possibly can, and more on the bike than anything anymore. And it's, when I have downtime, it's funny. People are like, why don't you take up a sport like pickleball or something? And I'm like, listen, I have things that I love to do, and that's like cycling, swimming. I love skiing. I love Nordic skiing. And I'm like, when I have time in the day, I'm going to do one of those things first. And, and once I can do those things as much as I want to, then maybe I'll take up pickleball. But I can tell you, I'm not even close to getting in enough of those things right now to satisfy my needs there. So I guess you could say I'm not taking up pickleball anytime soon.
Yeah. If you already have your hobbies that you like,
exactly,
don't need to add another one. Do you since you're traveling with them and with them most of the time, do you or your athletes have any like pre-race superstitions or rituals that you feel like you have to do?
I had more when I was an athlete, I can say, but as a coach, I just try to be like stability,
Yeah. As an athlete, what were a few of them?
Oh boy. I mean, I have some funny ones. When I was a runner, I would always run. This is kind of gross. I would always run throughout college in the same underwear and the same pair of socks. Which, in fact, I don't know where that underwear or those socks went. I should have maybe put them in in a case and hung them on the wall or something. But they were probably pretty bad by the time I was done with college. So that was a pretty funny one, actually.
Yeah. Wow. I haven't heard that one. That's a new one.
Yeah. And I'll go into more detail. The underwear had ants on them. So it was like, you have ants in your pants.
Yeah.
And the socks had chili peppers on them. So yeah. Yeah. So they both had like symbols on them of, yeah.
If you didn't do well, would you like get a new pair or
no? That was the interesting thing. I just kind of like stuck with it. I was like, today wasn't a good race. Yeah, I know. So yeah.
We covered a lot. But is there anything else that you want to share about like your coaching business, your experience?
I mean, it's funny. Yeah. I mean, I feel, like you said, I kind of feel like, which is maybe different than some coaches that you interview on here, is like, I feel like Training Peaks is kind of family, I mean, just because I've known Dirk forever, I've known Joe forever, and, I'm still relatively close with both of them and stuff. So, it's like, it feels more of like home than, I would say, than maybe, a lot of people, because, but also, and sort of jokingly, I spend so much time on Training Peaks.
Yeah.
I have no idea if at this point how many thousands of hours I have spent on Training Peaks, but I think about that sometimes when I'm on Training Peaks. I was like, if you had user hours, like I wonder like where I would sit in those user hours. It's
be in
like,
the top percentage.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, yeah, thank you so much for meeting with me. I know it's a little late on your end, but
yeah, no, it's perfect. This is great. Yeah, thank you very much.